I'd like to welcome everyone here. My name is Myra Marks Sherry. I'm a retired professor of sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a local affiliate of the Weatherhead Center and the Center for European Studies here, and a friend of the Davis Center. And it's my pleasure to be here to welcome you and to moderate a discussion with an extremely interesting fellow, Dr. Sergei Akopov, who is the Walter Benjamin Research Fellow at the Free University of Berlin. He's affiliated there with the competitively federally funded cluster of excellence in Berlin that's based at the Free University, but includes participants from all of Berlin's universities. This cluster of excellence, known as Scripts, is concerned with tracing the contestations of the liberal script that are emerging across Europe today. In other words, contestations of the taken for granted notions of liberal universalism that we see in the United States as well as in Europe as being very much contested. I met Sergei at one of the cluster's many meet and greet events in Berlin and was very interested in what he was talking on, and we carried on discussion later in the day. My own work has been trying to be one making sense of the wannabe autocrat who is now in our presidency, and the power of autocrats based in cultural and often cult-like appeals. I do not work on Russia myself, and I'm sorry to say here, but I knew from reading the excellent work of several of the people in this room that I could see that the ways of thinking that Putin draws on are deeply gendered in ways that militarism, masculinity, and authoritarian appeals are entwined with religion and nationalism as well. So my question was, when I started talking with Sergei, is what are you adding to this understanding? And what I found is that he's dealing not so much with the gendering of Putin as a leader, but rather with the psyche, the beliefs of followers, and the ways in which individuals in Russia and individuals in other parts of the world confronting this particular kind of masculinized, militarist, authoritarian leadership as appealing. What is it that's appealing about it? Where did MAGA come from? Where are these people in Russia coming from that they find Putin someone to look up to, someone to find appealing? What is going on here? And it took me some time before I fully understood his argument. And I'm hoping that if people don't understand everything that he's laying out here rather quickly, that you will ask questions and clarify, because it's really very much worth understanding. Sergei has published on this theme that he calls the politics of loneliness, a way of thinking about what's going on in the heads of people that are drawn to this sort of authoritarianism. And obviously, he is deconstructing aspects of language, aspects of culture, and aspects of gender in doing this. It is an active structure of feeling, and how it works is what Sergei is going to tell us now. And I just want up front to encourage you to ask questions and don't feel like, oh, well, he's explained it, I should have gotten it. I think it's complicated. I've read his work. I think it's really interesting, and I think it really requires some active engagement to understand the politics of loneliness.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What a wonderful introduction. I'd like to start by thanking Davis Center for Russian Eurasian Studies, and the Gutenberg Center for European Studies, and Weatherhead Center for International Affairs for inviting me. And thank you, Myra Alice Hu, Professor of Sociology Emerita, for this wonderful introduction. And I also would like to say that, interestingly, these three centers that I had the pleasure of being invited by do correspond to my fields of interest and expertise. I started off as a political theorist, and that was my 2 degrees in political theory and philosophy. But then I happened to be also writing on Russian studies, and recently have been drifting towards gender studies and feminism. And on the overlaps of these 3 dimensions, I do think that loneliness can be unpacked. And I therefore will start by theory building and theorizing on loneliness, explaining what I mean by loneliness and politics of loneliness in international political theory, where I probably right now most comfortably residing in terms of academic disciplining. I will then go into demasculinizing the politics of loneliness and illustrating that on Russian politics of loneliness with 2 articles, the one on political posters and the other on gendered humor. And hopefully we'll have time to briefly go over the future agenda. How can we theorize and introduce more loneliness studies into world politics, but also beyond Russian nation and state civilization, maybe also resonating with some of the anxieties that exist in other countries. Interestingly enough, I was preparing to talk about Russia, but as I came to United States, it turned out to be that it is, in terms of generalizability of my research, I think it can be very applicable for other cases as well. But before we move on, I want you to take a second and to think, and what is the opposite of loneliness? But don't answer me, think about that. I'm going to give you a minute, and I'll use this minute to anchor myself in feminist writing. The inspiration for this talk, actually, I was getting from anchoring myself in one of the museums in the United States. I asked myself, where am I writing my talk about loneliness? What is the space that I'm getting inspiration from? What is my connection? And in this sort of tradition of feminist écriture féminin, feminist writing, I found myself sitting in several museums and writing from museums. And that is very much largely because I happen to be right now not at home. I'm outside of my country and trying to bed myself and create some house spacing for my writing. I found it very inspiring staging myself as a strategy of survival in museums of different countries where I end up. And this is when international really gets personal. I contributed a chapter to this collected volume, Writing Saved Me. And that's in terms of strategy of survival, how I see my talk also. This is also about making myself as home spacing and anchoring myself. And the museum, which has been an inspiration for me, was the Museum of Rock and Roll of Fame in Cleveland, where I have stopped on the way from Chicago International Studies Association convention to Harvard. And obviously there is a lot about loneliness. And if you feel lonesome tonight, like Elvis Presley, you can read his quote, which is very important. And it's probably a central theme of my talk today. It is the theme about when we study loneliness, we also study actually loss. We study absence of something that people seek for, imagine, and desire. And that's what connects them in very strange imaginary ways to ideologies of different sort. So in terms of epistemology of how do we study methodologically something that doesn't exist, the absence. This is also one of the ideas that I will little bit explain as I get to methodological part. But of course, this is the quote about the music. It's about negotiating the loss and how we connect to this loss. And that is also, I think, relevant not only for Elvis, but also for my talk. So you have had enough time to think about what is the opposite to loneliness. And I don't know, maybe you can come up with some ideas. Do you have any ideas?
Community.
Community?
Well, loneliness is a kind of discomfort with oneself. So you could say an unloneliness. I'm not sure that's the opposite, but an unloneliness can be a kind of comfort with oneself, with being oneself. So take it a little different.
Yes.
Than people normally think.
Any other ideas? So actually, I should say that there are loneliness studies annually run all around the world. and obviously this is something that has been done mostly by psychologists and sociologists. And I have decided to briefly mention three main approaches to loneliness studies. The one that is more of psychological, and the one that is based on research of R.D. Lane, but also Clark Mustakas, and my colleague Ben Lazar Mijuskovich from California, who has written actually several books, whom I know personally. One of them is The Philosophical Roots of Loneliness and Intimacy. So he believes it's the intimacy, it's the intimate atmosphere that is the opposite of loneliness. That is one of the answers to this question. There could be multiple others. For example, I would say that if we think about that in terms of phenomenology and in terms of philosophy and cultural studies, I would say that in existential literature, if we'd say Albert Camus, or for example, Russian existentialist Nicholas Berdyaev, they would say that the opposite to loneliness would be authenticity. Objectivation, commodification, subjectivation versus authenticity of ourself. And
Heidegger would use the term Unheimlich, I believe, as opposed to at-homeness, as opposed to authenticity. I'm sure, I think at-homeness might get better at it, more at it than authenticity, at least for Heidegger.
Yes, we will skip on Heidegger this time, but I'd love to talk about that later because this is also part of my interest. But I would point to the third school, which is more of sociological and political dimension of loneliness studies. And here we, for example, have loneliness and lonely crowd effect and other directedness versus, for example, what is known as solitude. And this is what Gregor Zilberg was talking about, to some degree, Erich Fromm, but also has been written a lot by Zygmunt Bauman, Michel Foucault's work. And I particularly, I'm sure, would like to cite Hannah Arendt, who's famous for saying that the lonely man finds himself surrounded by others with whom he cannot establish contact or to whose hostility he is exposed, while the solitary man, on the contrary, is alone and therefore can be together with himself, since men have the capacity to talking with themselves. So you can see here solitude as an opposite to loneliness. I have written an article a little bit in detail about these approaches, which you can see at the bottom. And I also have analyzed their institutional responses to loneliness that had appeared rapidly even before the COVID. In 2017, there has been introduced the Minister for Loneliness in UK, Mrs. Crouch. And then after the COVID, particularly, European Parliament has started the pilot project on loneliness, publishing Loneliness of European Union paper. And myself, I got interested in loneliness in 2018, after I finished my studies of transnational identity, because I thought that loneliness is a very interesting complementary study for studies of identity and enemy images. In 2018, I found a lot of people scoring very highly on loneliness scale in Russia, particularly senior citizens, and also found them voting for Russian President Putin at that time in the elections. And I thought that this is an interesting a coincidence, or maybe not a coincidence, rather a correlation. And I started to dig into that. And from around 2018, I started to look at loneliness and how it can be explained in terms of its influence on political ideology. Well, let's go back to the Davis Center. So I will be sort of jumping around from political theory to Russian studies. And I remember we had interesting discussion at Association for Studies of Nationalism about the nature of what is known to be, is it Putin's Russia or is it Russia's Putin? And I remember Timothy Fry was talking about his book, Weak Strongman, and on the other side we had Samuel Green and Gunnar Fudinova at that round table suggesting that it's rather the people, Russia's Putin, that fuel Russian autocracy, not maybe the Putin himself. What is collective Putin? And for myself, I have imagined it as an iceberg of Russian politics. But to open the secret, obviously, I have to admit that I'm probably leaning closer to Gunnar Fudinova's and Samuel Green's approach. I do think that there is something that is hidden underneath or in the depth of this iceberg that shapes Russian masculine and foreign policy. And I was trying to understand what is this phenomenon. And I have started to study the politics of loneliness, by which I mean forms of politicization of human loneliness, and specifically existential loneliness anxiety, that serve the purpose of building legitimacy for particular collective identity, and that is also very important, preserving its ontological security. So here I have to admit that I am one of these ontological security, well, I wouldn't say fans, but let's say the followers of approach that was studied by Anthony Giddens and then today introduced by many other scholars, whom I will mention below. In that sense, I mentioned that I studied identity before, and I do think that there is a bridge between collective identity of voters and their anxiety on one hand, and loneliness in world politics, and narratives behind this loneliness that actually link them to political elites who communicate this discourse. I have studied this discourse on cases of Putin, but when I actually started to publish this work in a British journal, the editor suggested that I make a comparison with Brexit, because at that time, Brexit and taking control over British sovereignty and sovereigntism has become a very good case of politics of loneliness. And generally politics of national exceptionalism and what I call sovereigntism. I have explained this in my article, Sovereignty is Organized Loneliness, in what I call vertically organized politics of loneliness. And this is the website where you can find more in detail the rest of the theory, which I will be finishing right now and heading on to empirics. I made this website because I was asked all the time, so what is loneliness? Tell us about what are the definitions. So I just made this website, and you can find more in detail all the abstracts and all the summaries of multiple books on loneliness. As you can see, it's also part of my hobby, and you can explore it on your own. But I would rather take a time that much. God bless you. And illustrate what I mean by how this politics of loneliness actually works. Discursively speaking, in terms of discursive practices, when Russian president talks about Russian sovereigntism, he appeals to simultaneously to several psychological sides of human loneliness anxiety. I have pointed three, but I'm sure there can be more than three. But I would think that it is appeal to historical uniqueness of Russia and its civilizational identity. It's appeal to national pride and honor, and it's appeal to spiritual unity and discourse of Russian Orthodox Church. And from the level of Russia's collective identity, we can trace it, and that's what I did in that article, to the level of collective memory and nostalgia for the Russian past, or the greatness of the Russian past, fear of losing an identity and losing self-esteem and disintegration, and also a need for the sacrifice, for the sacred faith in the nation and state civilization, or sacral vertical of island of Russian state civilization. And communicating these discourses from the top up down to the voters has significantly fueled Russian nationalism and communicated political legitimacy to some degree, if we believe that it's not only Putin's Russia, but also Russia's Putin. A little bit about demasculinization. I mean, obviously, I'm not the guy who understands demasculinization by not feminine. This situation is much more complicated. I am questioning the whole idea of heteronormativity and the whole idea of what we discussed as traditional division of masculine and feminine. It's rather more about uncovering implicit and silenced phallocentric positionalities. It's the process which is quite time-consuming for myself, but also because I'm also, in a sense, a product of these phallocentric positionalities. And that's what actually my chapter in Writing Saves Me is about, how I discovered myself in a community of feminist scholars and what I learned from them and what I keep learning from them myself. So who am I, in a sense, to unveil those photocentric positionalities? Well, obviously, it is a long process that has just been started, but many of them are sitting in me. And deconstruction of those binaries, in generally deconstruction of binary approach to politics, binary approach division to domestic and foreign policy, masculine and feminine. This is something that is a big task in international relations theory, which is carried out by people like Rob Walker, for example. He's been talking a lot about that. In context of contemporary Russian sovereigntism and revanchism, this is my main argument, loneliness emerges as a masculinist anxiety that fuels gendered nationalism in world politics. Now, we have wonderful research in Russian masculinity, including some of the colleagues sitting in the room. But what I try to contribute is some research on loneliness anxiety and ontological security and how that can add to these studies. And I did that by looking at following methods, which I'm sure you all know, but briefly I will explain them because I use them for several of the articles, including the ones that I will talk about today. This is the autobiographical IR, International Relations, and the International Political Sociology article starts actually with my little autobiographical insights about my childhood and my getting envelopes with photos of a singer Madonna from the United States of America and how it made me very happy and how I thought, well, how come Madonna cannot come to Russia? So then Madonna came to Russia, and then suddenly I found out that she cannot come to Russia anymore again. So I was wondering what happened. What does the story tell us about Russia or about the world in general? And methodologically speaking, this is also interpretive phenomenological analysis because I'm analyzing my own experiences. Feminist deconstruction of gendered nationalism, which I'll tell you briefly in a second, and visual anthropology, which is directly related to visual representations. This is the books that I'm sure you know, that I have drawn from in terms of qualitative research. And I have analyzed this both as text, but also creolized text, but also visual images. But also I did some interviewing, which I will not talk about today because it's a separate story, but I have interviewed some of my colleagues, Russian scholars in exile, on the issue of structures of loneliness in their life worlds and their life stories, but this project is not completed yet. But in any case, we also have used this methodology to look at the discourse of Vladimir Putin and his gendered humor. This is some of the literature on autobiographic IR, which is related to reproduction of subjectivity, identity, and memory, and how it shapes political agency. Agency is important. I will finish my talk today on agency. And I also had drawn from Roland Blaker and Emma Hutchinson's approach to how we study emotions, because according to him, what we know about emotions is what we get to know about them from studying their representations, how they're represented through images, but also signs and symbols. And last but not least, I have drawn on work about gendered nationalism by Catherine Kinnewall, who is a representative for feminist ontological security studies from Lund University, and by emotionally gendered nationalism. She understands something loaded into memorial landscapes and other elements of national iconographies, including visual images, which I will show you later. As well as Brent Steele, who talks about different regimes of truth. Beyond giving a language for speaking about phenomena, discourse makes intelligible some ways of being in and acting towards the world, and of operationalizing a particular regime of truth, which excluding other possibilities, modes of identity and action, as well as promoting others in terms of identity. And in case of Russian militarized masculinity, shaping what is known as mainstream or main mainstream regimes of truth and acting towards the world. I have shown these photocentric positionalities in my article dedicated to contemporary Russian cinema. You can recognize this picture. I have just shown that to you earlier, but at the bottom you can actually see this time not only loneliness anxiety, but loneliness anxiety rooted in photocentric positionalities. Because I do believe that loneliness is inseparably related to the performativity of gender and gendered anxieties, male anxieties, particularly in case of Russia. And those male anxieties illustrated by Russian films, which you can see more in detail and recognize some of them. Those who know Russian cinema, like Mr. Sakhov, who is the head of the collective farm, who decided to kidnap his wife without asking her in exchange for refrigerator and number of cows. In the film, the captive of the Caucasus, Kavkazskaya Plenniца, as well as also military masculinities in the center in the film Nebesный Тихоход, and how the man become the main and the true heroes and the rescuers of the homeland and motherland. And then there is Mr. Bublikov, who is obsessed with photocentric positionalities, and he's the famous character from the 1971 movie Служебный роман, which is an interesting insight about Soviet photocentric positionalities at particular work positions and institutions. I will now in the article dedicated to the 21st century cinema, I have shown that those photocentric positionalities that existed in the Soviet films, they did not disappear, but you can actually see them and find them in modern contemporary Russian cinema. These are narratives of Russian historical exceptionism and the films like Land of Oz, Beanpole, Russia's civilizational pride, and Brother Two, and the film Glubzhe, Deepa, as well as human sacrifice for the motherland and her sacred Orthodox values, and the Balkan Wine and the Ninth Company. And on the right, you can see particular photocentric positionalities. This is a brief overview of what has been done before, and now I'm going to jump into talking about particular posters. This is a study that has been conducted by me after I left Russia. I have photographed political posters in St. Petersburg in September of 2021. And also I have managed to get other posters from Russia as they evolutioned and developed. And I have compared those images and tried to show in a dialectical way their transformation, starting from this one, dedicated to national pride and honor-driven practices, representing Moscow presidential military cadets standing shoulder to shoulder. And on your right, you can read, "We are Russia." This is the image of Russia that has been represented in Russian parliamentary elections in September of 2021 on the street posters in St. Petersburg. And this was their transformation to 2023, when these military cadets turned into soldiers that have been mobilized for the war. And the we have experienced militarization of masculinity. They are offered to go to war, as you can see, for a particular sum of money. The sums of money have been increasing year after year. And in the center, the message suggests that if you want to be a real true man, if you want to have a real true man's job, you have to go and serve in the army and participate in special military operation. Parallel to that and sort of supporting image to that was the image of feminized Russia, Mother Russia. The male gaze, I use Linda Alkov's approach to holocentric positionalities, and refer here to State Academic Choreographic Ensemble Berezka, named after Nadezhda Nadezhdina. It was organized in Soviet Union in 1948 and specialized in performing dances in long gowns and moving across the stage as the wheels or floating. Do you know what happened with it recently under Vladimir Putin's presidency? In 2006, this ensemble was taken over by administrative department of the President of Russian Federation, and unsurprisingly, it appeared on the posters in 2021. Maybe you remember the story about Anna Ivanovna Ivanova, half fictional, half real, meant to be a supporter of the Russian military operation in Kharkov in 2022, that appeared on the poster, suddenly symbolizing welcoming of the Russian troops. And you can see, interestingly, that she's holding the banner of the Soviet Union, which is for me symbolizing Soviet photocentric positionalities hidden behind her. And most interestingly, you can also see the shadow. It's a very much Carl Jung archetypical shadow of a masculinity, masculine mother defender from the Second World War, Stalingrad, Volgograd Memorial, which is for me sort of a symbol of this hidden signifier underneath the iceberg of femininity. There is always this masculine shadow of anxieties and the threats in terms of interpretive analysis. The other poster is related to what I have shown as the channels of discursive references to historical trauma and memory, and management of identity through nostalgia about the victory in the Second World War. In fact, a colleague of mine, Olga Malinova, has published a lot on that. And there is a sample picture of immortal regiment with a lady holding what you would call in America the pictures of the white dead men. Direct sense, she's supporting them, holding them above her head. And all the rest of except for the gentlemen on the left, are also ladies in this lonely crowd. Then we have seen the evolution of this hero image, how this dead white man has turned alive and appeared on the Russian posters as the hero of Russia. And this time it's a semi-colonel who has been on a special military operation and has been awarded, as you can see, a special medal. And this is the evolution that has occurred from 2021 till 2022. And last but not least is the religion, the so-called traditional family of Lubishovs, and promotion of what is called in Russian morальные скрепы, moral ties. Interestingly, this image can be a subject of not only critical whiteness theory, as those who know Russia know that not all Russians look like that in Russia, but also there is, if you look carefully, an orthodox. But you can. It's one of those pictures that looks like it has been made accidentally and quickly, but actually it's very well planned, because you can see Orthodox cross on her neck. You can see the symbol of maternity. It's an ideal nuclear family, and the family doesn't have any personal names. It's just one of the the Lubishov's family, an ideal self for the Russian community that requires these happy people to symbolize the Russian community. In 2022 in St. Petersburg by the Hermitage, I have photographed this very sad exhibition, which is, to translate the sign on your right, says, "Let there always be mom, let there always be me," which is about the children of Donbass, Donetsk and Donbass. The exhibition was opened by the mayor of St. Petersburg under the slogan that we should help the orphaned children of Donetsk and Donbass. And for me, it very much complements the image of a maternity, fraternity, this parents type of kids relationships, benevolent relationships of patronage of parents over the children that will be taken, all the children will be taken care of by their parents. So very much resembles Aristotle's concept of patriarchal emergence of the state, which is very popular in Russia. And here comes Madonna, which is the poster that you can see on your right. Underneath it's written here, "Be careful, fascism." The poster was made in 2012. It's not a mistake. It's much before the term fascism was actually applied for Ukraine. And that's very interesting, I think, a question, why and how come? Seems like fascism is sort of an empty signifier that is applied for different reasons. in my hypothesis would be here that what happened with Madonna was activity of Madonna in Russia and her coming to Russia, and the slides I will show you later, has really worked like, in a sense, a stick in the wheel of Russian masculinity and the mainstream promoted image of this benevolent and obedient lady. On your left, this is the poster which says, God save the Russian president. And this sort of a maternity model of Mother Russia protected by the strong gendered Russian state and its sovereignty. And of course,
the Western Sea.
Yes. President, this is already because after the beginning of the Z operation. That's why, yes, that's absolutely right. This is Madonna's activity in Russia. I have in my article quite a detailed description of what happened, how she was taken to court by the Union of Parents of Russia. But you can also see she supported Pussy Riot movement on your right. And in that sense, I would look at Madonna as a celebrity, as an alternative symbolic structure. Of course, I'm not talking about Madonna as a singer or as a personality. We're not discussing her personality, but in terms of symbolic politics, in my approach, she's an alternative symbolic structure and an alternative emotional code, alternative to maternity and model of Mother Russia, which is dominating masculine and feminine imaginary of the main master narrative. And by the way, this narrative you can see appearing that is already taken in 2024, quite recently. And you can see that the price has gone up for serving in the army. It's already $25,000. And this time it's a picture from St. Petersburg. A hero city has its own heroes. And if you look carefully, you can recognize that the image is already a feminine image. If to come back to our metaphor of Russian masculinist and sort of nationalistic sovereigntism that has been articulated and was supported by a feminist motherland identity, which is not news because we have publications about that. What I'm trying to contribute to the literature is to say that all that happens in this environment of masculine loneliness anxiety, which pretty much shapes this sort of ideal heteronormative merge of masculinity and femininity. And I would say that we can also prove this in our other article that we have published together with my younger colleague, Ekaterina Donskikh, when we analyzed 29 videos of Vladimir Putin's gendered humor and his jokes in our article that was published a little bit later last year. And this is an article about ontological security seeking strategies and gendered hierarchies in Russia. There, I would say that we talk about two strategies of how gendered humor can appeal to ontological security, strategies of masculinization and strategies of feminization, building on the work of colleagues, many of whom are present also in this room. We come up with an idea that, and we support the idea that feminization involves the denigration of the feminine to nationalize subordinate relationships, while masculinization, by contrast, is a strategy that attributes masculine qualities to power, as was pointed by Spike Peterson, whom I had the pleasure recently to meet in Chicago at ISA, and also other colleagues, Valerie and Elizabeth, for example, present in this room. And in our article published in International Feminist Journal of Politics, we give some examples of masculinization. And this is the joke when Putin addressing Merkel pointed to whatever you do on your wedding night, the result should be the same. And he asked, do you understand? And this is St. Petersburg Economic Forum. And as you don't get it. If you look at the video, Valerie, it took a while for Angela Merkel also to get it, but I would like to explain this context. Vladimir Putin was talking about federalization and how institutional work, and he said that it doesn't matter which institutions work with which institutions. What we care about is the result, how it's going to happen. And then he said, and there is a phrase in Russian. It's like on a wedding night, when you get married, no matter how you do it, the result should be the same. And he suggested, well, the production of the heir, or in a sense, the sexual act. Yes. And in the article, we say that besides the masculine narrative and the sort of unsubtle allusion to sex, one more interesting thing can be noted for Putin: the means to an end are not as important as the end itself. That is, if it is necessary to produce, for example, a child as a result of the first wedding night, then one can use seduction, violence, or anything that will be led to the desired result, which once again explains Putin's understanding of gender hierarchies and international sort of order. And we also note in the article, humor for Putin serves as a tool for building and strengthening Russian gender hierarchies, and is incorporated into narratives about Russia's ontological security and nostalgia for its imperial status, while the notion of Russian nation, the mother Russia, serves to mobilize people and articulate norms of femininity. The hypermasculine Russian state is expected to protect Mother Russia, which is threatened by the loss of Russian population, the recognition of minority rights, and the influence of the Western individualism. And here is an example of feminization. I hope you get it, but if you don't, I will explain. This is the story about an anecdote that Putin told in 2017. It's about the son who had exchanged a dagger for a watch. So the father asks the son, "Why did you do that?" "Dad, don't swear. I exchanged it with a boy for a neighboring yard for a watch, from a neighboring yard for a watch." The father says, "Well, show me the watch." And he looks and says, "Oh, the watch looks pretty good. You know, tomorrow bandits and robbers will come to us. They will kill me. They will kill your mother. They will rape your elder sister. And you will go out and say, 'Good evening, the time in Moscow is 12:30. And there was a laughter in the audience. We do not want this kind of outcome, so we will give the necessary attention to developing of our army and navy without getting dragged into the arms race, etc." Basically, this is a direct reference to threat of enemies coming, raping. You can see, I don't want to reproduce this discourse, it's very difficult for me, but it's on one hand securitization, but of a particular kind, which is related to gender, and it's also related to loans, because no one will be able to protect them if you do it right now. What are the future research in the field that I'm planning maybe to conduct? I have already started to do comparative analysis of cross-country loneliness narratives. I presented at ISA loneliness narratives and ontological security of Armenia and Portugal with my Portuguese colleagues. But I do think that we should go beyond just a Russian nation-state case. Russia is probably a very good case for loneliness studies of different sorts, but there are multiple other narratives of loneliness of different nature. And I come up with this idea of type pools of loneliness and regimes of truth that correspond to different type pools of loneliness. As I used to say, if you want to understand someone's regime of truth, you have to understand from which type pool of loneliness these actors come from. What is their existential situation? So I think deconstructing Russia's masculine politics of loneliness provides an opportunity to envision an alternative, less gender binary, and more gender fluid conceptualization of Russian identity in the future. Study of anxieties surrounding loneliness offers new insights and empirical evidence to explain why different segments of Russian society, that also includes Russian elites, which are lonely in some way and isolated from their own communities, isolated probably largely from their own information sources, as we have seen Vladimir Putin sitting on the long table during COVID. That also includes loneliness and regimes of truth of atomized Russian populace, which will probably never hear my presentation. at Harvard, and also those who will probably hear my presentation, anti-war diaspora and exile, which come from very different tide pools of loneliness. I have posed the question, what makes master narratives that appeal to structures of loneliness and anxiety in human life world so special and so powerful? And I do think that one of the reasons is they are connected to the ocean of international anxiety and to the level of international anxiety and conflicts and wars in the world, but also they are deeply gendered and rooted in male insecurities. And that is what is the added value of my research for international relations, for example. If we think of international anxiety, and this is not my term, but term of Andy Holm and Brent Still, as something related to, or can be envisioned as a tsunami of war, as the war falls upon, for example, Russia, we face different reactions of people sitting in different tide pools of loneliness. As you have seen on the previous slide, depending on the height of where they were and the safety of where they were, ontological safety. Those of more cosmopolitan nature, in, for example, cosmopolitan universities, transnational intellectuals, people who are linked to international community, they have been quickly washed away from Russia by the strong wave of war, and now many of them, including people in this room, they have ended up in floating freely in the ocean of international anxiety, sometimes in different countries across the world. But there were others who remained on land in their pockets of loneliness of a national and civilizational type. And in that sense, of course, their regimes of truth, including people who stayed in Russia and couldn't, for example, leave, would be very different from the regimes of truth of those who were washed away by the tsunami of international conflict. And I give an example, not in this article, but in my future article, of a singer Monetочка, as she characterizes herself, a strong woman from Russia. This is her self-characteristic from Spotify, where she sells her songs. And this is a picture taken from her concert in November in Barcelona as a participant observation project, watching how many young men and women were crying at her concert when she was singing her famous song. It was in Russia, it was a long time ago. And this is the words from the song. As Monetочка has happened to be, for me, an example of this transnational, a non-national, a non-state actor of resistance, and a center of Russian community abroad, which is trying to offer alternative vision of Russia rather than national or civilizational, which play the games and the rules of those characteristics that I have pointed to you earlier before. And this was in Russia. It means it was in a dream, but the dream cannot be stolen. It will stay with me, finishes Monetочка, not ready to give up. So to finish on that notion, I would like to say that coming myself from the same tight pools of loneliness as Monetочка to some degree, I want to thank everyone who helped me and my family after February 24th, 2022, and coming back to the beginning about feminist writing and the connectivity and the loss in the lecture today at Harvard on March 10th, 2025, I do think that it is very important to root your loneliness and resonate it with the tide pools of loneliness of other people in other countries. Because this is the way we can resist, and we can come up with opposite solutions for loneliness that you have mentioned yourself, like solitude, authenticity, resistance. This can be done if you root yourself, embed yourself, home space yourself in the other countries with people who are in similar situations of loneliness. And that is why I think the language of loneliness studies can provide a rich potential for building solidarity, including political and academic solidarity in the times of divisions and polarized worlds we're living in right now. So I want to thank for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a privileged position here just to ask a general kind of question and push you in that direction, and then we'll start collecting some more specific questions. A long time ago, a political science professor told me, never look at what leaders offer, but look at what followers ask. What do they want? Where is it that the followers, that no one is a leader without followers, and no one is a follower without needs? And what are those needs? How are they constructing this particular actor or this particular regime or this particular, as speaking to those needs? So if we think about the politics of loneliness as a depiction of those needs, of those insecurities, of the articulations that are not present, or in your nice image there, the not so much Putin's Russia and what Putin's doing to Russia, but Russia's Putin and what Russia wants from Putin. I guess my general question would be, is there anything that Russia wants from Putin that Putin can, in fact, provide? Is there satisfaction being generated, or, and here I jump to what I know more about with regard to Putin, is the analogy with Trump. And a lot of people who are talking about resisting Trump are saying, well, Trump is failing to meet the needs of the people who voted for him. The MAGA people voted for the party of leopards eating faces, and now they're upset because the leopards are eating their faces. That they asked for something that would inflict pain or domination or on others. And now they're losing out too. They're going to have a crashed economy. They're going to have a lot of losses. And when I look at someone who's been in power for considerably longer than Trump has been, what is it that people are getting from Putin? Or are they getting anything from Putin? Or is Putin's Russia replacing, if you will, Russia's Putin? Russia wanted something from Putin, saw something there. But are they getting it? And that's a very general kind of question. And I let you think about that. And I ask for some more specific questions also as follow-ups and whatever. Valerie. Oh, sorry, Elizabeth. Sorry. Brain dead.
Yeah, I'm really interested also in this politicization of loneliness and the ways in which leaders can take advantage of it. And I'm wondering, I have two questions. The lead one is, how has the Russian Orthodox Church played into this? And what about the gendering of leaders? So the women, they're, I just recently wrote a piece arguing that the women in the parliament are like the Baba Commissars, like these top ladies.
Yes.
And then there's the other generation of women politicians who are matushki. They're the women married to priests who embody multiple families and children and so forth. Some people around the table have heard it too much, but the point is, I wonder if there's a gendering of loneliness by leaders as they politicize it. And then a riff on Myra's question, does Putin in some way keep them lonely in the sense that, we know these leaders play on chaos, right? You can't actually fully, it's like the Kristeva, the abject. You can't satisfy the loneliness because then it won't work anymore. So I was curious, that might be too complicated, but it'd be interesting to think about, do they perpetuate the loneliness in some way? Partly perhaps through fear, all the, into the intelligentsia, all the foreign agents and undesirable organizations makes you very, very lonely. But maybe there's other ways for the masses. How does it how does it work? Does he ever solve, anyway,
Mhm.
riff on Myra's question?
Yes, Valerie.
I have a related question. I have a few questions, but I guess I'll start with that one. So if loneliness is about the opposite of solitude, right? If solitude is being content with yourself, it's just confusing to me about why lonely people would be so attracted to these brutal people like Trump and Putin, who are not accepting at all, right? Like they're not getting close to anybody. They're not reaching out. They're mean. They're derisive. They're not nice. So why do lonely people get attracted to those kinds of leaders? Like, do they somehow get? I mean, this relates to your question. Do they somehow get over their loneliness by being attracted to those leaders? Do they mistake those leaders for friends in some odd way? So maybe you could talk about that, and I'll just ask one more question now and save them for later if we have time. But thinking about like this is all about Russia's contemporary politics of loneliness. I was wondering how aware do you see the place of loneliness in the politics of the Soviet Union? Like, what did it look like there, or is it a contemporary thing? Because the Soviet Union was so collective focused, do people not feel alienated, or did they?
Thank you, Valerie.
Why don't you take a stab at those and then I'll let you start the next round.
All right.
'Cause
I'll yeah. Mm. So, yes, Elizabeth, I'm familiar with your work, and that's when I was writing the article about phallocentric positionalities. That was the article saying that it's not about the men and the women; it's about the role and the phallocentric positionalities that grow through the women as well as they integrate and socialize in the masculine society, and that's what we can see in Russian parliament very well. I can provide a lot of examples, but you're absolutely right. And we have this model of the commissars, and you remember that some of those women had endorsed basically everything that Putin has projected for the reason that they share those phallocentric positionalities, and therefore they are part of the game. Or what Madonna in her speech. The singer Madonna called playing the boys' game. Yeah, in that sense, they're playing the same boys' game. I also did not mention Vyacheslav Surkov's article about lonely Russia, 1218, about Russia as an alpha nation, which in a sense is maybe a little bit addressing Valerie's question. It's the power of seduction and power of attraction. When you offer a man masculinity and feeling themselves more, sort of, we talked about pride with you yesterday. Yes, it's raising self-esteem. In that sense, when I remember documentary movies about people who vote for Putin as they watch Russian planes go into Syria, successful operation, etc., they probably feel themselves part of this. We talked about Timos and the courage, yes, and this sort of a might type of power. That makes me also remember literature on psychoanalytics like Wilhelm Reich, for example, psychoanalysis in Hitler Germany type of literature. I think it's a very good question. I mean, obviously from our logic, normal anxieties, lonely people would seek some care, and that's what, empathy. That's what is missing here. And that's what feminism is discussing. This is not about empathy type of overcoming loneliness. This is more about overcoming loneliness, seeking particular connection that is always a temporary solution. That's what we discussed with you today, Myra.
Yeah.
The way that those social moods are constructed is that people are getting into the lonely crowd, and for some time they are provided sort of a simulacrum that they are not lonely anymore. Because I like to say this, not only people know that they are lonely. In fact, a lot of people are quite happy for some time, but then they need the next sort of injection of this known loneliness, which is another small successful war, another little annexation, and this is how it evolves. And that is how it fuels the geopolitics of Russian foreign, for example, relations. I would rather see it as that, and that explains why it's such a vicious circle of overcompensation, and that is because it is a loneliness anxiety, which is in that sense a bit perverted. Yes, it's not self-solitude and self-sustained, sort of self-fulfilling, self-actualized personality, which is happy with itself. It's rather something that is always seeking to belong to, as it seems larger than itself, a big empire or a powerful victorious nation. So that's what I think hooks it. And unless we provide at the school level of schools and kindergartens alternative methods of dealing with loneliness, but predominantly and permanently overcoming loneliness through identifying ourselves through empire or through heroes. And that's what happens in Russian schools today. We will keep returning to what I remember in my Soviet childhood. And I was a child in the Soviet Union. It's difficult for me to answer this question. It really needs a more historical analysis. But I would like to remember work of one of my favorite scholars, work on Tosca by Shelley Fitzpatrick, who had described very interesting phenomena in the Stalin society. Remember how the Stalin intelligentsia felt themselves very lonely in their own community because they were really out of place and what is called superficial, lishny, superficial people. And I'm afraid that this Tosca that Shelley Fitzpatrick was describing in the 1930s is coming back to people who, for example, stayed in Russia right now, and that's what I'm observing right now. So in that sense, there is some sort of a repeatedness in that. But I would rather shut up and let us have a discussion afterwards, and let others to ask questions.
Thank you very much. For me, it's a special feeling today being here because in a very different world, in a very different time, it was in Russia. How am I going to
A long time ago.
Yeah, so we were working with Sergei together at the High School of Economics in St. Petersburg at the one department. Can you imagine, how I feel, how Sergei probably also feel, and how happy and surprised I am to see you here today. And but even in these times, we were doing very different things. And now I have to confess that we still are doing very different things, even more different things. So I want to ask something very dilettantic. I'm very sorry because I'm a positivist and I'm doing institutions. What I want to say, so I have a comment and then I have a question.
Thank you.
So the comment is about, as far as I understand, there is again, sorry for my primitive understanding, because when you talk, I understand, and then I don't understand. And then suddenly again understand. And then again don't understand.
Let's try to fill
So this is how it like
Yeah.
okay. So this is this difference between loneliness and solitude.
Yes.
Because as far as I understand, loneliness has a negative connotation, right? It's an absence of something very important.
In loneliness literature, loneliness anxiety with Clark Mustakas is other-directed people. They cannot be themselves. They always look at others and they want to be part of a larger community. It's a conformistic approach. Yes.
Okay. Because I was thinking, because in Russian language there is only one word, одиночество. Right?
There is also with самодостаточность, for example. But we discussed this for a long time in Европейский университет when I did the talk.
But this is something very different,
Yes.
because when I think по-русски, я думаю, because I'm Russian, I think in Russian. Одиночество, I'm happy to be lonely. Одиночество heals. It makes you creative. It makes you yourself. Yeah, all these things. But still, самодостаточность is something very different. So this is, for me, it's kind of it's also a problem of language in a way, because одиночество is a luxury. It's also a luxury. It's not only a burden. So this is a very kind of controversial term, especially if you start to jump from English to Russian.
But what if you try the verb, the adjective, I mean, одинокий? Одинокий is not positive, the way одиночество can be.
Одиночество is not positive either.
Well, for her,
Yeah.
him it is, and.
Yeah, for me.
But
I like
одинокий is
одиночество.
never used in a
It's not,
positive way.
you know, the word in a language does not exist in the person. I mean, this is the way we communicate, right? So if for me a table is a chair and a chair is a table, then we can't have a conversation.
Well, don't worry about it, let's let Amy.
Yeah,
answer
okay,
the question.
yeah, okay.
Let's go.
So the question, but you made me think about the things I didn't think before. But I instead of I did have many questions, but I will limit myself to one. So this is if одиночество, this loneliness. I don't understand how can it be healed or repaired with turning to the Russia as great power, to empire, to all these things, because this group is for me too large and too anonymous. If I would feel like that, I would rather address the very small community, my family, my neighbors, all these kind of things, because these people I know by names, and these people I can visit my neighbors every time I want. So I don't understand how this appealing to very large symbols like empire can be used in the politics of loneliness. So or is it kind of this and that? So this is
It's this and that.
so I would be rather expect this parochial,
Yes.
element, приходской, this element than being, is it?
Yes. This is very good questions. I will partially answer them by referring to George Gordon Byron, who used to say, "In solitude we are least alone." So in that sense, in English language, solitude has a positive connotation. That is the reason why I cooperate with my colleagues from particular countries. I mentioned Portugal. In Portugal, there is a term saudade, which has a very particular specific meaning. And in different other contexts, there are other languages. So it's phenomenological analysis. We dig into context. The history of emotion school that studies loneliness actually does that. It digs into phenomena. And then it looks at different color shades, 50 of whatever, 100 color shades of loneliness that exist. And we try to unpack and uncover without actually making claims that something is good or bad. We'd rather try to listen to multiplicity of loneliness. In case of Russia, there are several types of loneliness. In the article, I mentioned why Russia is such a good case for loneliness study, because it has all the characteristics of very atomized community. Those horizontal relationships that exist in Scandinavian countries or even in France, where a country reside in Germany, is associations, they hardly exist in Russia. And that is the reason why this overreaching to your neighbors does not exist very well and does not work very well in Russian society. To the family, yes, it does. Or in the collective communal apartments when you used to live there. In situation when you have a lot of senior citizens who are left by themselves or in front of the TV, that is, or they become the victims of this politics of loneliness when they consume this imperial narratives. We're talking, so in other words, there is a long debate about can you apply this loneliness logic to collective level, and how does it work for the collective level? Or maybe it's too anthropocentric to think of where the states can have emotions or communities can have emotions. Well, they do have collective emotions, as we know, they have certain moods. And this is usually explained in ontological security through narratives, because people, by accepting, and I just referred to Philip Hamak's book on master narratives, by navigating ourselves through master narratives, we necessarily do adopt and integrate some of those narratives. This is how it works. And by adjacent ourselves, subscribing to those narratives, by voting or by just consuming or by buying things, we become part of this community which is covered by a particular narrative. In case of Russia, there are, of course, and this is actually an answer to Myra's question, Russia is the country of regions. There is no one Russia, it's multiple Russians, including the Russia that has left Russia, as we remember. So there is no one solution for Russia. And that is why I talk about multiple tide pools of loneliness that each need a very specific high school of economics that you have mentioned was a very particular tide pool of loneliness, which was very different from the community from the movie Leviathan, with a very significant name for the Russian sovereignty. But most of Russia, unfortunately, as we see, has happened to be closer to Leviathan type of community rather than high school of economics. And that is why I'm attracting your attention to both deconstructing the first one, but also not giving up on the second. It's the life world structures of Russians in exile, the life world structures using this Schultz sort of phenomenological approach. They're very, very different from life world structures of people in the movie Leviathan, or even in the movie Balkansky Rubezh, Balkan Line, where the Russian courageous soldiers are saving brothers Serbians from Kosovo, and Serbian women and girls as well alongside, because Serbian women also need to belong to the Russian world. That is more of imperial civilizational narrative. So it is both. That requires stronger sort of psychological analysis. Some of it is more quantitative, something that I think Gulnaz Sharfuddinova was doing a little bit in her book. And I'm not. I'm working right now more on micro level, but I do cooperate with scholars who do some more big data analysis. So we will try to look at different tide pools case by case and see what's going on inside them. I also use the term which is called artifacts of loneliness, because when I interview people, I look at different things that they show me, what they symbolize. For example, a plate where on one of my respondents showed me a plate where it's written, home is where my mom is. This is a gift from the daughter. Yes, this is a typical artifact of loneliness, which can be attributed to the transnational type of the loneliness of a person who left Russia. So that's another way, material way of how we can examine those stories and narratives. But I'm doing more of this type of, a bit of an ethnography approach. That's my type of a thing. But obviously, it would be very interesting to look at more bigger data in that sense. Yes.
I think this is really interesting from a comparative perspective.
Yeah.
I'm also not a Russianist. But if you're here on Wednesday, the sociologist Robert Putnam is going to talk 25 years after Rolling Alone.
Yes.
Which parenthetically alone might be an interesting. And so I was curious about your question of what are the parallels, what has happened over the past 25, 30 years in both countries. I think loneliness is being well studied in the US, and it's accepted that it's gendered, that men are lonelier than women.
Yeah.
But what are some parallels? And then the other comment is just something that's evolving and it's interesting to me and people of my generation is the aesthetics of femininity are changing really rapidly now under our decline into autocracy. There's a new term called Trump trad, which is traditional, which describes the women surrounding Trump, his new press secretary, the women he's appointing. Also, this new concept of traditional wives and influencers on social media that are gaining a lot of following. And so it reminded me of your feminization of the sort of Madonna look of Russia. So that might be something interesting to follow, the parallels of the aesthetics.
Yeah, Robert Putnam was a big inspiration of mine. And on my website, I cite his work, obviously, as well, Bowling Alone. It opens a bigger question of where are we heading to? I do think that the topic will become even more sort of demanding as we jump into artificial intelligence and the era of new loneliness and atomization and commodification. I do envision that we're going to have epidemic of loneliness very soon. And we are all in some way bowling alone. I'm interested in alternative versions of masculinity. I think that Russia has a very particular hegemonic dominated type of masculinity, but I'm looking for alternatives, and I'm interested in what we can come up with. As a guy who is also following the general masculinity studies and contributing a little bit to that, I would like to have more feminine masculinity and masculine femininity and other versions rather than just, this black and white type of approach. There is not really that much, sort of this is the topic which has been censored, as feminism in general in international relations, and in Russia in particular. And it's very sad. But in my other studies, when I interviewed people about Armenia, I heard interesting stories, for example, about how Armenia is one of the most militarized societies in the world because of very particular hegemonic masculinity dominating there. If you go to Yerevan, you will see there in the center a statue called Four Men. It's traditional, Armenian men because they really don't do much. I mean, they sort of talk and drink coffee. And as my respondent said, usually they're women doing the rest of the work around them. And they told me a story how, for example, it's a shame to push the stroller, with the baby and this type of thing in Yerevan. So in that sense, it's also shaming is a very important mechanism which I did not mention. So I'm taking not only Russian but other countries examples to say that it's a certain particular habitus, yes, of people that Russia is breathing right now, and it is rooted in governmentality and biopolitics related to gender. With the posters that I showed you very much stimulate very particular models, and if you look at Monetочка, for example, and other alternative rock, for example, musicians, but even the ones that I showed you from rock and roll and Madonna, they're alternative ones that we can look at and think of hybrid, more complicated and complex overlaps of masculinity and femininity, where those anxieties and those securitizations are less other directed, or in a sense more accepting. They can accept a larger multiplicity of what can be considered rather than just a norm or not norm in Russia right now. So in conditions of isolation in Russia right now, when you have sanctions and closed pretty much borders, of course, the more and more people are boldly alone in Russia. And in that sense, Putin's story is becoming very, very topical. And it's very sad to see that because loneliness cannot be cured this way. Yes, and there's no remedy from loneliness. In fact, only humans can learn to deal with their loneliness. There is no remedies from politicians. This is usually an illusion, or a Lacanian or Zizek, coming back a little bit to your story, a sort of imitation or temporary solution. We do need to build horizontal connections and friendships and people to people, more like diplomacy, relationships and bridges. That is the alternative way to deal with loneliness, anxiety, unless we really want to give all these people as victims of the populist narratives of politicians and autocratic leaders.
Valerie.
So I only want to ask the question if other people who haven't asked a question yet.
Well, is there anyone in the list here? You were looking like you might have a question to ask. Yes, no?
All right. Okay. So towards the end, you were saying that this loneliness anxiety is rooted in male insecurity, right? So that raises one question, which is, do we really need the concept of loneliness at all if we're really just talking about male insecurity? So that's kind of one question that I'll bracket for now. But when I was thinking, all right, if the problem is male insecurity, presumably, and I guess this is my question, I'm presuming, but I want to know if this is what you're presuming too. Does that male insecurity stem from the gender binary and the quote threat that feminism poses to that binary? In other words, like people no longer believe that like men are men and women are women, like masculinity belongs to men and femininity belongs to women. And feminism says that's all socially constructed, none of it is real, and none of it is, so then the solution to male insecurity is to somehow deteriorate that gender binary, right? To try to eradicate the hierarchy that says that things that are male and masculine are superior to things that are female and feminine. Because if we
Wait, who's trying to do that?
well,
Feminists or
well, yeah,
feminists were anxious, so I think they would want to increase it.
exactly. So so the solution to male insecurity from a feminist perspective would be to deteriorate that gender hierarchy. Of
Yeah.
course, the solution from the patriarchal perspective, from the Trump or
Yeah.
Putin perspective, is going to be to encase that hierarchy in armor and not let anybody get near it. And, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so I just wanted to know if I'm understanding your kind of presumption correctly.
Well, Valerie, I mean, I'm not saying that I put all the dots over the i's. I'm in the process, but if to think together, I would say that it resembled me very much my discussions at ISA, because we discussed, for example, men's suicides in India as a way to prove that to resist feminism is a strange, very, very weird way of resisting and defending their rights. And we also discussed with Catherine Kinwell this male insecurity as a response to globalization. In many countries like Sweden, but also US, when men feel that they lose control over their narratives of ontological security, when they don't know who they are anymore in this world because they don't control the situation, because there are a lot of other models coming in, then they are ready to risk and take physical risks, but to fight for their regimes of truth and ontological security and identity. And the reason for that is because they feel very lonely in that situation. Had it been alternative politics of loneliness offered to them, something that I asked Cynthia and Loy, for example, can there be non-toxic masculinity? And she said, yes, there are groups of non-toxic masculinity in America. And you should organize them as well in Russia when you teach feminism. And then we could have seen these transformations that we have also discussed at ISA with colleagues who also look at so I know that in feminist studies, there are a lot of different takes on that, and I'm careful about claiming particular one. But I think that we need loneliness because the loneliness is the key master narrative that victimizes not only male insecurities, but other insecurities around the idea of exceptionalism. And if we want to sort of to break through into the life world of this person and to understand what is the main anxiety of this person and to try to transform this anxiety, to get into a dialogue with this anxiety, if you can get into a dialogue. Loneliness is the key word and loneliness is the key code. And that's what is the added value of my research.
It's the narrative.
Yes, because it gives you the filter. Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking though, I mean, maybe it's just me, but I think everything comes down to masculinity and femininity and homophobia, but like even that globalization narrative.
Yeah.
You know, losing my security as a man, I don't know who I am anymore, I'm not a breadwinner, I don't have money. That's still about masculinity and about the gender binary, because if I don't know who I am anymore, I might not be a man, so what am I? I'm a woman. Well, I don't want to be a woman because that's bad, because masculinity is better than femininity. So I see what you're saying about the loneliness is the narrative that's being used by the kind of exploiters. And so it's valuable that way. But I think what you said is really right about it's rooted in male insecurity, and that is rooted in the very strictures of the gender binary.
So that is the reason why I usually, when I started to do this research on loneliness, I thought it's about some subject that we're researching and we need to unpack and figure out as some sort of a causal relationship. But also, I think that, well, me personally, for example, yes, if you take my example, it is also a way of transformation of masculinity. when I wrote about loneliness and I was offered to participate in the project by my feminist colleagues, I didn't know what feminism is, but I opened myself and started this long journey. And in that sense, it is not predetermined because it is not essentialistic. I mean, we unless we open the paths, we would never know. But for me, this loneliness, I was thinking about that a lot, looking at how people are playing frisbee at Harvard. Loneliness, in that sense, you add it as sort of as an additional lens, which has this transformative component in it, which can actually has this constructivist power of changing something that we consider as a factor that determines causality. It penetrates into this factor, and actually, under the loop, we see that these things can be actually more complicated. It's like the story of a feminist scholar who told us in ISA how some terrorist, on one hand was a terrorist, on the other hand was bringing the little bird that she found in the garden, and she was so caring, explaining that she is the protector and provider of the care for this animal. So in that sense, my inspiration comes from very particular sort of humanitarian, branch of psychology about getting into those lonelinesses, unpacking them, and transforming them, and trying to getting into dialogue rather than stating that something is a key factor or I mean I'm if for some people certainly yes. I mean, well, okay. I mean, I'm interviewing, including feminists, I'm interviewing people, for example, from Pussy Riot, other people. For them, of course, this is the key factor. That depends on their life worlds. For other people, it's other things that are more and more important. But it's the narrative around their loneliness and talking about their narratives that actually structures the life world that I'm trying to impact. It's the way for me to communicative action in that sense, to study reality and to try to look at what people prioritize and try to unpack it into alternatives that I had pointed out to you, to see whether there is a sidewalk to that, another type pool of loneliness. That's how I see it as a process.
What is really about alienation? And we use a different one.
Yeah.
And it's when Irina was talking, I was thinking about how so much of Putin's and Trump's appeal relies on "Ura! Ura!" You should see, those of you who are not Russians should see a good Russian crowd really excited by it. It's
Goida.
What's this?
Goida.
Well,
Goida.
that's too, but in public setting, when you have 10,000 people all saying it together. And so I'm actually finding myself thinking a very unfeminist thought, which is not usual for me, that really this in part has to do with a kind of archaization, a return wanting, because we haven't explained why women are voting for Putin and Trump, why women are choosing this dress that is so crazy. And maybe what we're seeing is people can't, in an intellectual setting at Harvard University, we're very happy with nuances of different masculinities, and we love unpacking that. We love gender bending. I personally absolutely adore gender bending, and I mess it up and it's much more interesting, right? But maybe it's with this maybe the keyword is not loneliness, but anxiety and alienation. And then people choose narratives that look simpler. I don't believe they're traditional. We have had this conversation. But the gender binary then becomes the let me retreat to what I think I was taught, what I think I know, and what the leader provides me spaces. Because I was thinking, in a way, you haven't given me sociological data that shows that they are lonely. Russians could be less lonely because 85% of them think this war is justified, which is horrifying, right? They could be less lonely because they're isolated, the same isolation from the Soviet times. You knew what was right and what was wrong. You knew who the heroes were. You knew that your country was being beat up on. He returns to that narrative, the besieged fortress. We're inside the fortress, we're safe. We don't have to be lonely. TV tells us we're safe. So then the issue is, is it that, and Trump says things are simple. My economy is excellent. And the rest of us say, no, it's much more nuanced. We need more confidence, checks and balances, this and that. But I don't know, anyway, I'm just wondering, because I haven't heard you explain female voting. And I do think there's something, I don't know, possibly different in Russia around Russian, but I think you're right, that fed this narrative of heroes, you identify with the hero, therefore you don't have to think for yourself. Like, you know.
Yes.
You go, and
Yes,
blah, 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 over and over and over again. You know, and that's why he loves World War II narrative, you know, which is just insane amount of only the positive, the heroism of World War II, not the mud and the amputees and the suffering and the famine that came after the war. That all gets bracketed to have, we won the war, we saved Europe. But you have to bracket the mud, the amputees and the famine to do that.
Not just Europe, the whole world.
Right, you saved the world, thank you.
To be honest with you, I have never lived in a country that believed in the leaders. So I don't know how you saying that, I mean, maybe it existed right after the war, but certainly by the time that I was
Oh,
living.
Brezhnev, yes, of course. There was
By
a
the
lot
time I
of
was living
that's
there.
when the humor came out, was because people, and you don't see much humor in Russia today, I bet.
But Russia is also a society with a very low level of trust. That's another thing that has to be considered. And people seeking this trust, yes, and trying to.
Is the level of trust lower than it was in the Soviet Union?
Well, it's hard now to measure under current conditions. Let's put it this way, but that is also certainly a predisposition for this sort of alienation and atomization. Yes.
I guess I just wanted to come back, not so much with a question, but with a comment that one of the things that I think we're all grappling with in different ways. It's what I grappled with when I was first reading your work and thinking about what is this loneliness thing? Is this what we really mean by alienation? Is it a redundancy to say loneliness, anxiety, or is loneliness in fact an emotion like an anxiety? Or this question of self-direction, is that what this loneliness is? Is it the other direction, the absence of self-direction, the absence of a particular purpose or vision or way of imagining your way forward? If you can't see a way forward, are you then in this position of loneliness and destabilization? Or another suggestion that came up as we were talking about is not solitude in some sense, but vacancy. Less about the place from which you can write or create, and more like the writer's block, if you will, the place where you can't create, you can't think, you have a vacancy somewhere in the middle of your mind. And you're looking to put something in there. Another thing that has been floated around, and I'm just trying to do this as a kind of wrap up, point out that all the questions are really revolving around our still unsettled sense of what it is that loneliness is and what is its alternative, and that we need to get a better handle on that in some way or another to really use it as a tool to understand the emotional, the practical, the organizational, the institutional features. You know, is it, if we talk about it as a kind of loss and the grieving of a loss, or is it the kind of thing that in the US is being talked about as the loss of male jobs or the hollowing out of an economy? That it's not just globalization, but it's the rapidity of loss of a particular social arrangement and not the ability to come to terms with that loss. A gradual change is different than a more sudden change. Anyway, all of these different ways of thinking about this are things that I think you have given us, provoked us with, offered us alternatives we may not have imagined. And I really want to thank you for doing that and wrap us up here.